The rain fell in heavy sheets over Boston that night. The cobbled streets of Beacon Hill glistened under the dull glow of gas lamps, but in one stately brownstone, darkness loomed far beyond the storm. It was nearly midnight when a neighbor called 911, reporting a woman's piercing scream. By the time officers arrived, the house was silent, except for the rhythmic drip of blood pooling onto the marble floor. Inside they found two bodies. One was Olivia Hartwell, a 19-year-old college student, sprawled across the Persian rug, her chest caved in by repeated blunt force trauma. The other was Judge Thomas Caldwell, a respected 57-year-old federal judge, slumped over in an armchair, a single gunshot wound to his temple. The gun was in his right hand, but something about the scene felt off. The case would send shockwaves through the city, exposing hidden affairs, power struggles, and a brutal betrayal that no one saw coming. 3 weeks earlier, Olivia had been just another face in a crowded lecture hall. A bright but struggling pre-law student at Harvard, she was drowning in debt and desperate for a way out. That's when she met him, Judge Caldwell. He was a guest lecturer speaking about judicial ethics. His presence was commanding, his voice smooth. When he spoke of justice, it was as if the law bent to his words. Olivia was captivated. She never imagined their fleeting conversation after class would change her life. He invited her for coffee, then dinner, then weekends in his secluded lake house. At first, Olivia felt special, chosen. But soon, the secrecy, the power imbalance, and his possessive nature turned the affair into something more sinister. Detective Michael Reyes examined the crime scene. The gunshot wound on Caldwell suggested suicide, but the blood spatter and the bruising on Olivia's arms hinted at a struggle. If this was a murder-suicide, why had Caldwell bludgeoned Olivia instead of simply shooting her? And why was there an open suitcase near the front door, her clothes hurriedly stuffed inside? The medical examiner's report confirmed what Reyes suspected. Olivia had been dead for at least 2 hours before Caldwell, which meant someone else had been in that house. A week before the murders, Olivia had confided in her best friend, Lila. She wanted out. She was tired of the secrecy, tired of the fear. Caldwell had become paranoid, convinced she was seeing someone else. Then there was the cryptic text message Olivia had sent Lila the night before she died. "If anything happens to me, look at him." And her. Reyes pulled up Caldwell's financial records. Large monthly payments to a mysterious account. After some digging, the name attached made Reyes's stomach drop: Victoria Caldwell, the judge's wife. Victoria Caldwell was the perfect judge's wife, elegant, poised, and fiercely private. She had stood by her husband for 30 years, even when whispers of his infidelity surfaced. But Reyes wasn't convinced she was just a scorned wife. Then came the surveillance footage. A grainy but unmistakable image of a woman, draped in a raincoat, entering the brownstone at 9:15 p.m., the estimated time of Olivia's murder. Victoria claimed she had been home all night. But when Reyes confronted her with the footage, she didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled. "You'll never prove a damn thing," she said. The prosecution painted a chilling picture. Victoria had discovered the affair and plotted revenge. She killed Olivia in a fit of rage, then forced Caldwell to write a fake suicide note before executing him. But the defense had a counter-theory. They argued that Caldwell had killed Olivia in a jealous rage and Victoria, upon discovering the scene, had shot her husband in an act of grief-stricken vengeance. The jury deliberated for 3 days. In the end, Victoria was convicted not of first-degree murder but of manslaughter. A crime of passion, they called it. For Olivia's family, the sentence felt hollow. The truth was tangled in a web of deception, and only the dead knew the full story. Years later, a new forensic report surfaced. Blood spatter analysis suggested Caldwell had been shot at a downward angle, by someone standing over him, not sitting across. A detail that changed everything. The case was reopened, but Victoria Caldwell was long gone. She had vanished after her parole, leaving behind only speculation. Some believed she had fled to Europe under a new name. Others whispered that she had ties to people in high places, people who had helped her disappear. As for Olivia, her story became a cautionary tale of power, manipulation, and the deadly price of secrets. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of Boston, whispers of the judge's secret affair still lingered, proof that justice is never as simple as it seems. The rain had stopped, but the city of Boston remained cloaked in an eerie silence. The case had been closed, but for Detective Michael Reyes, something didn't sit right. Victoria Caldwell had served her time and disappeared, but the blood spatter analysis still haunted him. The crime scene never fully aligned with the prosecution's version of events. He had gone over the case files again and again, and each time, something gnawed at him. The gun. Caldwell had been right-handed, yet the trajectory of the bullet suggested the shooter had used their left hand. Reyes had overlooked that detail before, caught up in the media frenzy and the airtight case against Victoria. But now, after years of experience, he recognized what had been right in front of him. There was someone else. Reyes revisited the case files and found something odd. An overlooked phone call placed from Caldwell's landline just minutes before Olivia's estimated time of death. It had lasted only 14 seconds. The number was unregistered, but the call had pinged off a tower near Beacon Hill, just 2 blocks from Caldwell's home. Who had he called? And why had no one followed up? Reyes dug deeper, tracing the number through old databases. Finally, he found a lead. The number belonged to a burner phone registered to a name that made his pulse quicken. James Halloway. The name didn't appear in the original investigation, but Reyes knew exactly who he was. Halloway was one of Caldwell's former law clerks, ambitious, sharp, and utterly devoted to the judge. He had built his entire career under Caldwell's guidance. Reyes found an old press photo from years earlier, Caldwell at a charity gala, Olivia by his side. In the background, just out of focus, was James Halloway watching them. The look in his eyes sent a chill down Reyes' spine. The first time Reyes met Halloway in person, it was at a high-end law firm in downtown Boston. Halloway had moved up quickly since Caldwell's death, now a partner in a firm that handled high-profile cases. When Reyes entered the office, Halloway was all confidence, his tailored suit crisp, his demeanor controlled. "What can I do for you, detective?" Halloway said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Reyes didn't sit. He placed a copy of the phone records on the desk. "You spoke to Judge Caldwell the night he died." A flicker of something barely noticeable crossed Halloway's face before he smiled. "I don't recall that." "You called him." 14 seconds. "What did you talk about?" "I think you have the wrong man." Reyes leaned in. "You were obsessed with him, weren't you?" Halloway's smile faltered. "I read through your clerkship records. Every case Caldwell handled, you followed his lead. You shadowed him outside of work, even handled his personal errands. And then there's Olivia. You knew about her." Halloway's jaw tensed. "You were jealous, weren't you?" "Not of Olivia. But of him. You wanted his life. His power. And when you realized he was willing to throw it all away for her, you had to stop him." Halloway exhaled slowly, but his hands had tightened into fists. "I don't know what you think you're doing here, detective," he said, his voice lower now. "But whatever theory you're chasing, it's over. The case was solved. Victoria Caldwell killed them both. It's done." Reyes stared at him for a long moment before standing up. "For now." He left without another word. But he knew. James Halloway had been there that night. Reyes couldn't prove it yet. But he had one more lead to follow. Olivia's best friend Lila. It took some digging, but Reyes tracked her down in New York. She had changed her name and disappeared from public life after the trial. When he met her at a small cafe in Brooklyn, she was hesitant to talk. "You don't get it," she said, stirring her coffee. "I tried telling them before. No one wanted to hear it." "Telling them what?" She sighed. Olivia was scared of someone. And it wasn't Victoria Caldwell. Reyes leaned in. "Who was it?" Lila hesitated. "I never saw him up close. But Olivia said he was always around. Watching. Sometimes when she was with the judge, she'd see him in the distance. Once, she told me she thought she was being followed." Reyes's heart pounded. "Did she ever say a name?" Lila nodded. "Halloway." A chill ran through Reyes. "Why didn't you tell the police back then?" "I did. But they didn't care. They already had Victoria." Reyes felt the weight of the truth settle on his shoulders. Halloway had gotten away with it. He had let Victoria take the fall, watched as she went to prison while he built his career. And now he was untouchable. Reyes knew he needed more. A direct link. Proof that Halloway had been in the brownstone that night. He revisited the old evidence logs. One item caught his attention, an untested strand of hair found on Olivia's body. At the time, investigators assumed it was Caldwell's or Victoria's. But DNA testing had advanced since then. He pulled strings. Got the sample retested. 2 weeks later, the results came back. It wasn't Caldwell's. It wasn't Victoria's. It was James Halloway's. Reyes had him. But when he went to make the arrest, it was too late. Halloway had disappeared. Gone without a trace. Only then did Reyes realize Halloway had been planning this for years. He had anticipated every move, every possibility. And now he was free. Somewhere out there he was starting over. And Reyes knew deep down this wasn't over. not by a long shot. The case of Judge Caldwell and Olivia Hartwell was officially closed. But for Detective Michael Reyes, it never truly ended. Holloway had vanished without a trace. No credit card activity, no phone pings, no social media presence. It was as if he had never existed. Reyes wasn't surprised. Someone like Holloway, calculated, methodical, wouldn't leave a trail. But Reyes knew one thing: ghosts always leave shadows. Months passed, then a year. Reyes moved on to other cases, but his obsession with Holloway never faded. He kept tabs on international flight manifests, offshore accounts, any whisper of a man fitting Holloway's description. Nothing. Then, nearly 2 years later, a break came from the most unexpected place. A murder in Buenos Aires. The victim, a wealthy, high-profile judge. A man with a reputation for scandal. The method, a single close-range gunshot wound to the temple. A staged suicide. Reyes' blood ran cold. It was identical to Judge Caldwell's murder. Reyes pulled every string he had to get access to the Buenos Aires case files. It wasn't easy, foreign governments didn't like US cops snooping around, but Reyes had made enough friends in the right places. The crime scene photos told him everything he needed to know. There was no sign of forced entry. No defensive wounds on the victim. No fingerprints on the weapon except the judge's. It was a near-perfect execution. But then Reyes saw it, the detail that sent a jolt through him. The judge's right hand. The gun was in his left. Holloway had done it again. Reyes booked a flight to Buenos Aires. He knew the odds of finding Holloway were slim, but he had to try. The moment he stepped off the plane, he felt the heat, not just from the weather but from eyes on him. Someone was watching. He checked into a discreet hotel in San Telmo, the old part of the city. The streets were a maze of narrow alleys, perfect for disappearing. If Holloway was here, this was the kind of place he'd be. Reyes spent days retracing the judge's final movements. The man had been seen with a young associate at an exclusive club days before his death. No one knew the man's name, but the description was unsettlingly familiar: sharp features, refined manner, American accent. It was him. Reyes was close. Then one night, Reyes found a note slipped under his hotel room door. No name. No signature. Just a warning. Reyes smirked. Holloway knew he was here. And that meant Reyes had already won. The next evening, Reyes sat at a cafe near the waterfront, waiting. He wasn't sure for what, but he had a feeling. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw him. James Holloway. The man was dressed in a crisp linen suit, sipping a glass of wine as if he hadn't a care in the world. But when their eyes met, Holloway's smirk told Reyes everything. He wasn't afraid. He was amused. Reyes stood, ready to make his move. But before he could take a step, 2 men in dark suits approached his table. "You need to come with us," one of them said in Spanish. Reyes got twisted. He wasn't dealing with just a killer anymore. Holloway had protection. Powerful protection. And that meant Reyes was in deeper than he'd ever been before. Reyes weighed his options. 2 men, well-dressed but with the unmistakable stiffness of trained operatives, stood on either side of him. He glanced at Holloway, who leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine with the ease of a man who knew he was untouchable. "You don't want to do this," Reyes said in Spanish, keeping his voice even. One of the men, the taller one with a scar running along his jawline, smirked. "You don't want to make a scene." Reyes considered his surroundings. The cafe was full, tourists and locals enjoying their drinks, completely unaware of the tension tightening around the 3 men standing at the small iron table. He could fight, but he wasn't stupid. Instead, he let out a breath and nodded. Scarjaw gestured toward a waiting black SUV parked near the curb. Reyes walked, feeling the heat of their presence at his back. Holloway never moved from his seat. He simply raised his glass in a mock toast as Reyes was led away. The SUV moved through the dimly lit streets of Buenos Aires, heading toward the wealthier districts. Reyes remained silent, staring out the window, watching the city blur past. "You're persistent," Scarjaw finally said. Reyes turned his head. "It's my job." The man chuckled. "No, your job was over years ago. You're here because you can't let go." Reyes didn't respond. The SUV pulled into the underground garage of a sleek high-rise. The moment the doors locked behind them, Reyes knew he was deep in something far more complex than just a murder case. They escorted him into a penthouse office, where a man in his 60s sat behind a glass desk, watching the city skyline. His suit was tailored, his silver hair neatly combed, and his presence radiated power. Reyes had been a cop long enough to know when he was in the presence of someone who pulled the strings. "You must be the detective," the man said without turning. Reyes said nothing. The man finally looked at him, his gray eyes cold. I hear you're looking for James Halloway. Reyes kept his expression neutral. I don't think I need to look anymore. The man smiled. No, you don't. He leaned forward, placing his elbows on the desk. I have a question for you, detective. Why are you here? Reyes frowned. Because James Halloway is a murderer. The man chuckled, a deep, knowing sound. There are many murderers in this world. Some of them sit in prison. Some of them sit in offices like this. And some of them, his smile widened, sit in cafes drinking wine, waiting for men like you to play their role. Reyes felt a chill crawl up his spine. Halloway had known he would come. Had expected it. The man continued, You're not dealing with some rogue fugitive, detective. Halloway is useful. Reyes clenched his fists. Useful to who? The man stood, walking to the window. You think this is about one judge? One girl? Halloway plays a part in something far greater than your justice system. Reyes exhaled, his heart pounding. Then why am I still alive? The man turned back, his expression unreadable. Because you interest me. You don't strike me as the kind of man who scares easily. He stepped closer. But even the most stubborn men know when to walk away. Reyes held his gaze. The man's smile returned, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. Or you find out what it really means to chase shadows. Scarjaw moved toward Reyes, pulling something from his pocket. A passport. Reyes' passport. You're going back to the States, Scarjaw said. The message was clear. Reyes could walk out of here now, alive, or he could keep digging and disappear like so many before him. The flight back to Boston felt like a defeat. But Reyes knew the truth now. Halloway wasn't just a killer. He was protected. By who? Reyes didn't know yet. But he wasn't going to let this go. Because the moment a man like James Halloway was allowed to walk free, it meant one thing. This wasn't over. Not even close. 3 months later, the package arrived at Reyes' apartment with no return address. Inside was a single photograph. A picture of a man sitting at an outdoor cafe. James Halloway. And scrawled in ink across the bottom of the photo were 3 words. Come find me. Reyes exhaled, gripping the picture tighter. Halloway was playing a game. And Reyes had no choice but to play.